For Gmail or for Stripe,
Exactly.
like when I go to enter my password, it's just my second factor.
So what's happening here is the same thing as this, but the key that's generating those tokens based on time is on your phone.
Right.
So if your phone ever became compromised, those two factors will also become compromised, right? So in this scenario, it does the same thing, but the key that generates the token is actually on the implant. And it doesn't come off.
I see. So
there's no way to get that key even if the phone was compromised. So if I present the tag, I can get my tokens that way.
Whoa.
And even if
so you're saying that when you go to log into GitHub,
yeah,
that it asks for your password and it asks for a second factor of auth,
and then I generate it with my implant.
The Thinking Podcast by Nootrobox. I'm the host, Michael Brandt, and we have a special guest here today, Amal Graafstra, who's an adventure technologist and also founder of Dangerous Things, which is a site where you can go to buy different implants, NFC and RFID implants that you can put actually into your body that help you to do things like unlock your phone or different locks. So we're here to talk about the implications there and just learn more about the space in general. So Amal, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no problem. It's it's great being in San Francisco, and it's always fun experiencing the downtown and all the technology going on. I just saw a list of high-tech cities, and San Francisco's right up there.
It's really interesting that San Francisco is always considered a high-tech city because there's a lot of things that are very high-tech about it. There's some of the best, most interesting new companies in the world are here. And there's also something very quaint about it. When you think about high-tech cities, sometimes you'll think about like Shanghai,
right,
with every building is
gleaming, and LED lighting everywhere.
And in San Francisco, we have our trolley cars and our pretty Victorian houses. So it's an interesting city that kind of has the mix of old, like things that are literally from the 70s or older, and very new, exciting companies. I think that's part of what gives the city its charm. It's
very steampunk on the outside, like high-tech cyber on the inside.
Yeah, and you're just coming in from DEF CON.
Yeah, in Vegas. So that's all about cybersecurity and what's going on. There's a new biohacking village in DEF CON, so now we're looking at like biological security.
Okay.
Like what's happening with our DNA sequencing. Could you weaponize the data, that kind of stuff. So there's all kinds of crazy stuff happening.
And so you're particularly interested in security and privacy, I can guess, just by the notion of a lot of what you've been working on has been implants that help people to unlock things. And can you tell us a little bit about what makes that a particularly interesting angle of attack into the human body? Like what is it about an RFID or NFC chip that's particularly interesting? Of all the reasons to implant something into your body, why is that where you're focused?
Sure. It's kind of the same as nootropics. It's about augmentation, human capabilities, and there's a fundamental difference, in my opinion, between the tools that we pick up and use and tools that are integrated into us, right?
Yeah.
So like your kidneys are working hard, but you really don't think about them much, right? So a perfect implant technology, augmentative technology, is exactly that. It's managementless. There's no management. It's seamless. It integrates perfectly, and you don't have to worry about charging it or does it have signal or all this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of why these quantified self devices, Fitbits and whatnot, end up in the drawers, because we already have these modern day Tamagotchis, these things we have to manage in a day: the wallet, keys, and phone. Those are like the three things. But if you add devices to that, it becomes cumbersome, and people just they don't want to do the extra management. So there are people that are extremely passionate about it, of course, and they'll do it to the nth degree, but by and far large the general public, right? They have this management burden, right?
There's always that drive in technology that actually things should feel like less technology.
Exactly.
When things feel like more technology, it starts to feel very like cluttered and nerdy, and you have to have a lot of like mental capacity just controlling all of your doodads that you have around.
Yeah.
We always think about like the original computer hackers, and like it was really hard to even have a computer when you had to like solder each part together.
Yeah.
But now that you can just have something that works out of the box, the ubiquity is 1,000x what it would have been.
Yeah.
And so something like implants, which if you're mentioning that one of the key characteristics is very low maintenance, or actually zero maintenance, to where it just works.
It's transparent. It just disappears. And
and that's very exciting.
Yeah, my first foray into this was actually in 2005, and so I was working for medical clinics, doing HIPAA compliance checks and things like that. So I was going in and out of my office door, which actually was a basement in a clinic, and it had an emergency door. It wasn't meant for ingress, egress. It was just meant for kind of running out when your building's on fire. So it had one of those crash bars that was locking every time the door closed. There's no way to unlock the door. And so I'd go out and I'd grab a heavy server and I'd come back in and I'd have to grab my keychain. And I'm like, I did it 20, 30 times a day. And I'm like, this is not cool. I started thinking about, like, keys are just these archaic cut metal pieces of crap that we carry on our keychains that identify us, right? So
Right.
It really is 700 BC type technology, and it hadn't changed. So I said, I just want the door to know that it's me. And so I looked at, like, fingerprint scanning and iris recognition, that kind of thing. But back then, and even still today, it's expensive and clunky, and particularly for outdoor sensors, it's not very viable. I mean, you can get a vandal just, like, stab it with a pen, and it's broken. So RFID technology, the badges, you just tap at the door. Right. It's robust, it's simple, it's cheap, and reliable. So
it's interesting because I think if you're an alien from outer space, you're really just looking at, okay, where is the barrier? Is it that a human is coming with their fingerprints and their eyeballs, and then that's the layer where they're meeting the technology, and the technology is reading them? Or is the technology inside of the person where they have the chip, and then when they go to the door, it just reads them seamlessly? Because there's always going to be that barrier where, like, human meets machine, and
sure, yeah.
And what you're saying is that if you have a very affordable device, it's like $100.
Yeah, exactly.
That's inside of you, and then that allows for much cheaper and more robust, durable sensing, as opposed to a retinal scanner.
Right.
That's a more viable path. That's where it would make sense for the barrier to be.
I think so. And I mean, the reality is that when you have something like this technology, it gets rid of that management problem, right? So you could totally have an RFID system, and a lot of people have experience with these key fobs or access cards, but you're just, again, carrying another token, another thing. And so it's just not for me. I want to get rid of the keys entirely. So I've totally upgraded my house. I can get in the house, office, start my car, start my motorcycle, get into a fire safe, log into the computer. Like, I even made a smart gun that I could, like, only I could pick it up and shoot it, kind of thing. So those types of identity problems is what got me thinking about what it is that we're doing here. So on the surface, it looks like, oh, you just get an implant and now you don't have to carry your keys. Who cares? That alone to me is huge, because the first time you forget your keys and you're late for a meeting, you just don't have that problem. I've never had that problem for the last decade, right?
Yeah.
It's awesome. And so that lack of management, I mean, imagine running out the door without your keys or wallet or phone. You'll have a panic attack, right? Like, oh my God, I gotta have something, right?
Are there any other kind of interesting ways that you stretch the technology? Like, when you're staying at your friend's house, do they provision you access to their door? Like, have you done...
Yeah. Sometimes, like, if there's systems that like friends have the electronic locks. I mean, you don't have to be a super hacker to do it either. I mean, you could just buy, like, an electronic door lock that reads key fobs, and then put it on your door, and you're done. You don't have to,
and I can say, like, Amal's going to be in town for this weekend, like, grant access to his ID.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll show up, and then he'll just put the lock into programming mode, right? And I just scan my tag, boom, it's in the inventory, done. And when I leave, he can take it out.
Yeah, and it's a lot more convenient than making copies of keys and
secure too. I mean, like, locks in general, like a traditional key lock structure is all, the locks are unique, and each key for that lock is copied. So the keys become common and generic for that lock. And once you release a key, it's really in the wild. Like, anybody could go to the hardware store and make a copy. So this is the inverse of that, where the locks are all generic. They're all the same, but they just maintain a list of unique keys. And so I'll put my key into infinite number of locks or whatever. The same, ID number will work in any of those locks.
And then is there a risk of spoofing? So if there's a lock and I put a discrete reader on the lock, so the lock is reading your chip, and so is my reader is also reading your chip, then do I know your key?
Yes, so that's one of the problems with traditional RFID, right? And so in a personal use context, like on your home, right? It's not typically, it's still a risk, but the context is different. So the total risk is not that much. Like, if you had it in your home and I wanted to get into your home, I mean, I would have to attack you specifically and your home specifically. I could probably just break a window instead, right, and get in, or other surreptitious means of getting in. So in a business context where somebody might want to gain access to the business or to a bank or to some kind of other more public or general use context, like even payment cards, right, tap and pay cards. Those contexts, there are the risks are higher, right?
Yeah.
So we actually started addressing that with our next iteration, our product, which is called Yuki. It's basically a full cryptographic platform. It's a Java card smart programmable platform. So if you know anything about like Encrypto or Java card applet programming, you can actually make your own crypto programs and load that onto the implant as an application. So there's some standard apps like PGP, which is data encryption, decryption standard. There's U2F, which is coming out. That's already on there. There's Bitcoin wallets that are already loaded onto my prototype here in my arm. So in those scenarios, somebody listening to the conversation wouldn't it uses cryptography, so it wouldn't matter.
Yeah, because I think one of the questions that people have is, hey, okay, I get it that implanting something could be better than a key, but I need it to be flawless. The same notion of like, I don't ever want to have to charge the battery. Like I don't ever like if I'm gonna put it inside of my body, I want it to work 100% of the time. So I think that there's this very high barrier that people have, at least at the point that technology's at now, which is, hey, I want it to work like perfectly.
Right.
I want there to be zero risk. If I'm gonna implant something, I want it to work like. No zero maintenance.
Yeah, exactly. So these are all zero maintenance, right?
Yeah.
These will last forever. But I think the interesting thing is the reality, the logical and rational idea here is that you talk about an implant or something like that, people have a real visceral reaction. They're like, ugh, they don't want to do it, or ugh, there's the idea of putting something under the skin. But at the same time, it's actually far less risky than even getting an ear piercing.
Oh yeah. Well, so that's actually an interesting segue. One of the things I read about you is that when you sell these kits online, you have suggested people that you recommend that your customers go to actually do the implanting. Yeah. And what's really interesting is these are not always necessarily medical doctors, which can be really expensive, and they sometimes won't do this kind of implant.
And they're not very good at it.
And they're not very good at it. So you actually recommend among the set of people that you recommend are people who do piercings.
Yes, professional piercers who are licensed and bonded and have aseptic procedure in studio. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, tell us more about that.
Yeah. So when we first started Dangerous Things, the whole idea was, like I say, I did this in 2005, and then things cooled off for a bit. There was a little bit of media hubbub, but then the maker revolution started. Like people started going back in the garage and building things again, and like hobbyist electronics people were like building things, and so there was a lot of interest now coming back into RFID, and particularly implants, just because people who understood how to build things, they could say, oh man, that's cool, I can build this thing, but I can also get an implant, so I can just like magically wave my hand over it and do something. So at that time, there's still a lot of coverage floating around out there from 2005, and so people just started like taking transponders out of car keys or any old place they could find them and not testing them for safety, and then just like ramming them in their body any old way. So it was becoming a problem, and so I started Dangerous Things with two goals, which was one, provide safe stuff. So we ordered and worked with factories and manufacturers and tested and like said, okay, these are our selected safe products. We'll make products out of
So
them.
was this stuff out there, and you sort of did a curation job of finding
At first,
which OEM parts were good for implanting, or are you actually designing the spec?
Well, we are now, but at first we started out with just sourcing. So all the millions of these things are being made every year for pets and animals, right?
Interesting.
But some of these manufacturers were also making other chipsets in these same safe materials. But some were just making them for industrial purposes and totally not safe for implanting. So we had to find which ones were doing which, source those, then ask the factory to put in additional QA checks. Because these are going to go into people, right? So, working with those factories to get that done was great, because then, just very quickly, we decided, okay, that was goal one, so safe stuff. Goal two is safe installation. And so we came out at first with a DIY guide, like here's how to do it, get a friend who you trust and do it.
Yeah.
And that very quickly evolved into scrapping that idea and then going with professional piercers, because they deal with needles and they know how to handle skin, and it just made sense, right?
Yeah.
So we had a guide made up for professional piercers, and we started growing a partner network, and then we have hundreds around the world now.
I just think it's so interesting as a kind of backdoor into the human body. It's like body modification is just a lot more, seems a lot more casual, or a lot less serious and invasive than medicine is, and a lot more approachable too, like the friendly tattoo person as opposed to the scary hospital.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting. Like one thing that we've talked about before is as we're talking about generally, enhancement and implants, and we think about people who undergo gender reassignment, right? So like there's things that are already happening in the world that we can borrow from. If people are already getting tattoos and piercings, or we're already implanting things into like our dogs, or we're already seeing people have their gender reassigned, like then how you kind of take those together and it's like, hey, it doesn't seem weird at all to implant an RFID chip, right? We're already like, there's already like, literally like we've already surrounded the area. Like there's already a constellation of things that are going on that are very similar. That this is, I think that it lowers the cognitive leap to the notion of enhancement. It's like, hey, wait, like, is it really all that different from, your tattoo piercing guy who's done it 20,000 times, who's done a very similar thing, right?
Yeah.
With a completely clean environment, controlled procedure, dependable outcomes, like that's your guy. That's or gal. That's the person that you would.
And they're not. We've had doctors do installations. Some of them turn out good, but most of the ones that doctors install don't, because they don't read our documentation, because they have a bit of an ego. Sometimes that happens with artists too, but for the most part, piercers are eager to learn, specifically about something new for their industry. So they're just as excited to be involved as we are to have them. So, but what's funny, what you mentioned, all the gender reassignment and tattoo, all this stuff, it's swirling around identity, right? So your gender identity, you're expressing yourself, your identity through your tattoos, and now this is kind of hitting right at the heart of why we want to keep producing better and better, more secure devices. Is that if you think about solving real problems, being able to just leave your keys at home or get rid of your keys, that's not a real problem that needs solving. I mean, we've got keys. It's an incremental improvement. And so, but what is a real serious problem today is identity itself, particularly digital identity, and bridging your biological identity with your digital identity. And so, right now you could argue that your digital identity is way more important than your biological identity. The who you are online and in records and bank accounts and Facebook and messaging and SMS, all of that is really how you communicate now. It's you, right? It's a proxy for you. And so all of these things that are critically important for you as a biological entity are just loosely protected with these passwords and the things that are just completely insecure. And so, we've all had friends whose accounts have been hacked, and it's very obvious because they post porn or whatever, right? But what's more scary is that, an account that could be compromised and then very surreptitiously and subtly start undermining things, right? And this is a real problem in areas where regimes are not friendly to free discourse and freedom of the press, and people with dissidence against the governments or the regimes. They have real serious problems, even with things like two-factor, where, for example, people in China who might be dissenting or other areas, they will have their Gmail accounts and then they'll lock those with two-factor. But the problem is Google sends SMS messages as a two-factor. That's not cryptographic, and so China controls all the mobile phone companies, and so they just block that message, take it, and then log into the account, and the person never knows that they've been compromised. So the idea of identity and actually retaking your ownership over identity and merging that with you, who you are as a person, is really, really important. And by doing that with this crypto implant, the Yuki, we can actually envision a future where, for example, when you log into your bank account, it's not just the username and password and then you start sending money. It's actually, you need to sign that transaction cryptographically. Any transaction of moving of money, sending a message, SMS, or anything, posting on Facebook or Twitter, if you can sign those things cryptographically so that everybody can verify, yes, this was actually you, and then beyond that, sending encrypted data to you so that nobody can read it. But just the idea of signing and owning the identity, that means that Facebook or somebody working at Facebook couldn't actually post something as you. Somebody who compromised your account couldn't post something as you. So the idea of taking back control of your identity is where we want to go. We want to solve that problem of identity management online.
Interesting. And it seems, so you got me sold. Security makes a lot of sense. Maintaining one's right to privacy, it seems like a really valuable motivation for people to invest in these new types of technology and implants. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious then, if you're going through the trouble or the investment of implanting, what are some of the other interesting things you could backpack onto there? Like I noticed, for instance, one of the implants that you sell on Dangerous Things does body temperature reading.
Yeah.
Is that an area that you're investigating? Because it seems to me if you're gonna do the work of the research in the go to your tattoo parlor and have the thing and have them implant it, it'd be great to know some basic biomarkers as well for free
Sure.
if you can get it.
So now we're venturing into the idea. Fundamentally, these devices that we have are called passive. They don't have a battery, so they induct power from a reader that generates a magnetic field. And it's like NFC on your phone. It creates a small magnetic field around the phone. You bring the NFC tag within range. It pulls power and talks to the phone. So that's fundamentally different from a device that you might want to do like constant monitoring with. That's going to need power.
Okay.
And so right now, you think about like a pacemaker has a battery, and that battery lasts for 10 years. Or it might have a rechargeable type battery and it lasts maybe 5 years or something like that. But the pacemaker, it uses microwatts. It uses such a small amount of power that they can get away with just sticking a battery of a specific chemistry in there and then take it out 10 years later and it's fine. But when you're talking about like, I'm going to monitor temperature, I'm going to monitor pulse oximetry, I'm going to telemetry that out with Bluetooth or whatever, you need a much bigger, more dense power storage device. And so the go-to for that is lithium batteries. But I mean, you've seen hoverboards explode and like vape pens explode and like Sony laptop batteries catching on fire. So there's a real serious problem with that energy storage technology when you're talking about putting it inside your body. Not just the explosion, but like hydrofluoric acid, which is lethal. Like all these things, these byproducts of a failure of the battery would be serious problems.
So your bodies are already metabolizing. You already have glucose going on in your body. You already have ketones going on in your body. Is there going to be a way for implants to be able to take advantage of your body's natural
potentially? There's a lot of work going into like kinetic, piezoelectric, so movement. TEG, thermoelectric generation was kind of mulled over. But your body's really good at fouling up those things. So there's even a glucose battery that's trying to be worked. It's a fuel cell, really. It uses glucose, which, I mean, glucose for pound has a ton of energy in it. That's why we use it, right? But it's very, very difficult. In vivo is a very difficult place to be. And so when you have something that's interacting with fluids, trying to pull glucose from the body, that kind of thing, the body reacts. It builds scar tissue around the device. There's like even bacteria that gets introduced into your system. Like, let's say you have this thing and it's doing its job, pulling glucose out, and then you go and get a vaccine or a blood draw or something where they poke a needle through your skin. And for all the prep that you're doing there some bacteria gets in. And so if that bacteria happens to float to that device, it can actually attach to the surface where the body doesn't care about the device. The materials are fine, but it forms this biofilm around the device, and the body starts trying to reject it. So it's called biofouling. And so there's so many things that get in the way. Even thermoelectric generation, your body detects the loss of heat and shuts down blood vessels around the device, right? So it just doesn't work. I mean, in fact, one of the projects that I did, I put a solar panel under my skin because I wanted to see the delta between above and below skin in a controlled setting. So just to see if I could like rely on that as a potential power source. But really the bottom line is we need a better battery. And that's actually something we've been working on for over a year now, is using a nano technology with casein protein to be able to actually build a flexible storage battery for power. Because once we have something we can actually store a decent amount of power with good density, then you're talking about like, okay, now we can actually do constant monitoring, we can do temperature, we can do pulse ox, we can do motion, we can do sleep tracking, we can do all the things that you have the gadgets for, but in a device that's inside of you. And hopefully we can design it in a way that's very low or no management. Yeah,
and right now the killer app, so to speak, for implants is being able to unlock doors. For what you're working on.
So that area or genre of identity, right? So moving beyond that, we're looking at like Bitcoin transactions, being able to actually encrypt your email and data, being able to only boot your laptop if you have a crypto implant, that kind of thing, is one of the so expanding on the identity aspect of just access, because RFID stands for radio frequency identification, and in an inventory context, like shirts on a shelf at Walmart, it's about counting and locating. This shirt is here at this time. But in a human context, identity is typically about access. Either I'm okay to pay for this with this account, or go through that door, or log into this computer. So the applications beyond those access applications are privacy applications. How do I make sure that I'm the only one reading my email? How do I make sure that you're the only one that, that you're able to verify that I sent my email to you? Like, how do you actually ensure privacy beyond identity?
And it's interesting because one of the, at a philosophical level, one of the reasons that you've mentioned in the past that you're so interested in this is the notion of freedom.
Yeah.
That we're talking about access and identity and protection, but you see it as actually expanding our freedom. And that's interesting, right? Because it's not just like some limited use cases where when you're sending top secret files, like you have a way of having really good two-factor authorization, but your notion is that in general this is going to increase our freedom. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like how do you see this as expanding freedom?
Sure. So it's really tough to think about a future where essentially your biological personhood is at a value level of 0, right? You can't even open a bank account with all the appropriate documentation which ties to digital records and things like this. So being able to actually verify authenticity of yourself, and then actually protect your personal and private communications from eavesdropping or whatever, spying, those kinds of things, like it fights directly the types of oppression that could lead to problems. So if you're talking about, I want to be able to open an account somewhere anonymously, but I want it to be secure.
Right.
That's really tough to do without crypto, right? So you can't really be secure and anonymous. So, but with cryptography, you can, because you could say, okay, I've got a public and private key. Do you know how PKI public keys work?
Yeah, I mean, run it through us for everyone out there.
Very simply, it's spy magazine, magazines when you're a kid or whatever.
Yeah.
I'll give you a secret message, and we both have a password, right? And the password is used to encrypt it, and then you use the same password to decrypt it. That's shared key. We share it. But how do you share the key securely? That's the problem. So public key encryption is freaking awesome, because it means that if I'm going to do something, I make a key pair. So it's a crypto key that's split into 2, and I make one public and then one private. And you do the same. And so what's awesome about these is they can encrypt and decrypt each other's things.
Right.
So they're one way. Meaning if I use the public key to encrypt something, only the private key can decrypt it.
So if I want to write a message that only you can read, I use your public key to encrypt this message, and then no one else in the world can read it, because only someone with the private key that matches that public key, i.e. you, would be able to read it.
Exactly. And then you can also sign that message that you send with your private key, and then I can verify it using your public key. I can verify that signature. So we have the ability to send something that's secret, verify the authenticity, and verify that it wasn't altered in transit. So being able to do that is great. Now picture a situation where you want to open a bank account or a Bitcoin wallet or something like that, but you don't want to use a public key that's tied to you. You just generate a new key pair that's anonymous. It's not tied to you in any way. It has no reputation. And so then you're still using the power of the public cryptography, but it's a new key just for this application. So you can always come back to that bank or whatever and unequivocally verify that you're the account holder, but it's now anonymous.
Yeah, and it seems a lot better than scribbling a signature on a piece of paper or something like that. Whatever we use currently to verify ownership.
Or I think thumbprint or something like this.
I think to say that, no, like I own that key and it's stored on a device, it's literally inside of me, is a lot more robust than here's my hand squiggle.
And it's actually more secure too. I mean, this is, people ask why implant it, right? And the reality is cryptography requires computing. And computing on your phone or your laptop is insecure because it's a general purpose computing platform. Yeah. Your phone's compromised, I guarantee it. Your laptop's very likely compromised. So when you have your public and your private keys on your phone, for example, the second it gets compromised, it's no longer private. So anybody can then take those keys and go and use them. So by putting in an implant that's removed from those platforms, I can, if my phone is compromised, that's fine. It's not good, but I can still use the phone with the implant, and then the person that's attached my phone still can't get at my private key because it's here. So I pass the data to this, it does the signing, and then kicks it back. And so they might be able to see what I was sending. Maybe they even might get some of the content, but they're not going to ever be able to pretend to be me or very likely not be able to decrypt other things that are sent in transaction on uncompromised devices.
Yeah.
So it's in order of magnitude more secure, in my opinion, to remove it to something like this implant.
And it's brilliant. It's giving us superpowers. It's very clearly a way of enhancing and increasing what we're able to do in the world, like the leverage that we're able to have if we're able to authenticate into more and more secure things and do it more in a more guaranteed way. Then it's better, right? We're able to engage in more things,
and it's actually covert too. This is the other thing. Like I have 4 devices now, 2 of our regular products and 2 prototypes.
Yeah.
And I pass through airport security. I unless you are aware of them, like a body cavity search or strip search wouldn't even reveal them. So being able to actually protect my data at this point anyway, because it's not a common thing, is pretty covert. Actually.
Yeah.
Unless I declare that I have them, it's not really an issue.
Do you think that this is going to be the type of thing that crops up, not necessarily in the United States, but maybe in other countries where there's more oppression? Like, is it one of those things where you need the right kind of perfect storm of things going on politically to where enough people are super motivated to go and do this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the motivation right now is definitely going to be like high value individuals, people that have a lot of data or physical security needs, financial security needs, data security needs, communications security needs. So we're kind of wrapping this up in an offering where we can say, hey, if you really need this kind of protection, then we can make a package for you and help you out.
So that's interesting to me, because that makes me wonder, like, are there going to be companies where, in order to work for this company, their security protocol is so robust that they're actually requiring employees have a implant?
It's funny. That's interesting, and it wasn't really an issue before. I would say that wouldn't have been any kind of requirement before, because quite simply the implants that we had were not secure, so there would be no reason.
Like an RFID isn't doing that for you, but but YuKey is.
YuKey is, yeah. So, but even then, back there was enough media hubbub about what I'd done in 2005 that actually 3 states passed laws where it makes it illegal for employers to require an implant.
Okay.
Georgia is one of them. I think Tennessee is another. But here's where I think they overstepped. They actually in the legislation they included that an employee could not even be incentivized to get one. So I'm like, I get not making it a requirement, but not being able to incentivize one, like, hey, we'll pay for the implant and we'll like give you a raise if you get it.
Yeah.
That's free market, and like all the conservatives in those states were really pushing this like anti-chipping bill or whatever they call it. But like to throw that in is just hypocrisy at its finest, you know.
That's very interesting. I think that it seems anti-free market, and it seems to get in the way of progress for like what seems like a sophomoric interpretation of just like fear of implant, like irrational fear.
Yeah, it was actually driven
technological process.
It was driven by this company called City Watcher, and they made some waves because they were putting chips into their employees, right, for access to their data center. And the news story was all about this company's making these employees get it, and they weren't. They were just saying, if you want an implant, we can do it, or you can have a key fob, right? So the media got it wrong and caused a bunch of stink. But what I find really, really annoying and almost perverse about that whole problem, that whole story, was that they completely ignored what City Watcher does, which is they pull camera feeds from everywhere, all across cities, everywhere, and they run facial recognition to track people around the city. That's more terrifying than the implant to me. Like, just walking around a city enrolls you in a biometric face scanning system, and you have no idea. Like, come on, guys, you're like looking for the anthill and there's an elephant right in front of you. So it's just goofy that because RFID, the implant, is a tangible thing and it's a visceral thing, it gets a lot of scrutiny and a lot of misinformation about it. Like, oh, they can track me or something, or any Hollywood movie reference to a chip, it's always about like firing a missile at somebody or finding where they're at or whatever. But the reality is, like, biometric systems that are already deployed are far more scary and Orwellian.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to see that you're thinking about the space a lot, and you're doing a lot of the the detailed work of actually figuring out implementation. The general concept of implants and enhancement in general is very exciting, and it's really interesting to have you on as a guest and hear about just the implementation details of the batteries and the legal considerations and the security benefits and just a lot of the details that you've obviously thought through. How do people find out more about what you're up to?
Well, you can go to dangerousthings.com, and we're just starting now a forum, and we have a couple Facebook groups going too. So I'm trying to consolidate everything and be a better marketer. I'm mostly a technology developer. So
yeah, well, you've already done a ton of work in making it all the more accessible to people and helping to debunk and productize a lot of what's a really interesting concept. You made it very real and tangible and actionable, and it's exciting to see what's next there and how it becomes even more useful, even more accessible, even lower friction to for people to participate in. So thanks. It's great to have you on.
Sure.
I just want to say thanks again to Amal Graafstra for being here. You can always check us out on YouTube and SoundCloud and iTunes. And please keep letting us know your questions for us or for our guests. As always, we give out a thinking cap to people who chime in with questions. So let us know, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.